Hello, everyone, and welcome to the other side of the news. Let's take a look at today's Wall Street Journal, Tuesday, July 21st, 2020. We see on the cover here, notice this. Oh, Liberty Island is open. Liberty Island reopened to visitors on Monday for the first time since being closed in March because of the pandemic, as New York City allowed activities at more outdoor venues to resume. The Statue of Liberty and the island's museum remain closed. What's the point of going to Liberty Island if you can't go to the Statue of Liberty? Boy, that makes as much sense as half the things the New York mayor does. The other thing is, why are all these government offices closed? If the people are getting paid to interact with the public and support the public, why are they closed and why are they still getting paid? What are we doing here? I thought Trump said the government was supposed to reopen. Why is it still closed? And I'm not talking about Liberty Island. I'm talking about Social Security offices. Why are they still closed? Who can tell me that? Leave a comment if you know why, because I don't. Let's see what else is on the page today. GOP puts down marker on next virus aid bill. Republicans on Monday laid out their priorities for the next round of coronavirus aid, calling for legal protections for businesses and money to reopen schools, but no funding for states and cities sought by Democrats, kicking off a sprint to pass legislation by early August. Sounds like a good idea? No, we should not pay those cities and states that overspent and even now spend money poorly. Why should the federal taxpayer bail them out? Forget about it. Now, this is interesting. Let's go down and look at this graph here. Cases in U.S. rise but ease in Europe. Cases in U.S. rise, but ease in Europe. New COVID-19 cases, this is this graph right here. New COVID-19 cases in parts of the U.S. continue to surge, exceeding 3.8 million nationwide, while Europe has phased out its lockdowns without a jump in infections. We're going to go look at that. Now, these are confirmed daily cases on a rolling 7-day average, and here Europe is in red, and you see they had a peak just before we did way back in June. But then their cases came down. Ours plateaued and pretty much stayed high and now have surged much higher. So clearly they're doing something different than we're doing. So let's look at and see what that is. Okay, here we are. Europe keeps infection rates down. Shift in social behavior helps nations reopen without jumping cases as U.S. still struggles. When Western European countries began phasing out their lockdowns this spring, a surge of coronavirus cases was widely expected to follow. Months on, even as Europeans mingle in bars, restaurants, and crowded beaches, that hasn't happened. As a surge in cases forces a number of U.S. states to reimpose restrictions, Europe's reopening is for the most part going according to plan. That is largely because of marked changes in social behavior across much of Europe, following widespread efforts by policymakers to drill the public to follow a simple three-pronged approach. Keep a distance when possible, enhance hygiene, and wear a mask when necessary. Older people who are more vulnerable are especially careful. Quote, people in Europe understood what they need to do to take it seriously, says Ilaria Capua, an Italian virologist at the University of Florida. The crisis has been handled differently in different countries, but nobody in Europe is saying this is a nothing crisis. Crucially, experts say, European countries that slowed the incidence of COVID-19 to a trickle have all continued to ban so-called super spreading events, mass gatherings that are believed to have acted as incubators for the pandemic. Despite occasional limited outbreaks and a spike of cases in the Balkan countries and a worrying cluster in northeast Spain, the number of new infections in countries such as Italy, Germany, and France continue to decline after lockdowns were lifted and in recent weeks plateaued at a few hundred a day in each country, down from several thousand at the peak of the crisis. And we're like 30,000 a day in our country. Wow. Europe was the center of the virus in March and April, with the 5 biggest countries, Italy, Spain, the UK, Germany, and France, having reported over 1.1 million infections and 148,000 deaths. This is because we stemmed the first wave of the epidemic by many of our citizens changing their behavior. Professor Luther Weider, the head of Robert Koch Institute, Germany's Center for Disease Control, said last week. Even in Sweden, which never instituted a lockdown and has suffered a high mortality rate, the number of new cases has plateaued as people observe distancing rules and a ban on large-scale events. The low level of new infections in Europe has freed up hospital beds and allowed public health authorities to focus on testing and isolating virus carriers and on tracking down and testing their close contacts. Oh boy, I just don't get it. How come they can reopen and we can't reopen? They got everything open, and now we're still like in 3 months ago. I just don't get it. And people need to wear masks. That's why we're getting infection. People aren't wearing masks; they're not protecting themselves. In Atlanta, violent crime surges. Rising gun violence mirrors trend across U.S. 8-year-old girl is among the victims. A recent wave of violent crime has roiled the city of Atlanta, amplifying tensions in a community still reeling from the coronavirus pandemic and a debate over policing and race. The uptick in gun violence has mirrored a trend in cities across the U.S. such as Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia, where police departments reported a higher number of shootings and homicides compared with the same period last year. But Atlanta has seen a particularly dramatic rise in violent crime, compounding the unrest in the city that has been a center of protest over police brutality and racial justice. As of July 11th, 106 people were shot over a 28-day period, marking a sharp increase from 40 people during the same period in 2019. A spokesman for the Southeast Regional International Brotherhood of Police Officers, the Atlantic Police Union, didn't respond to requests for comment, but the union has publicly stated that officers have stopped policing as aggressively after what they see as an anti-police sentiment among local officials after the killing of Rayshard Brooks in an Atlanta parking lot in Wendy's in June 12th. Folks, yeah, I don't know what we can say here. This is black on black crime. Yes, the police have a few bad eggs there, but if you beat up all the police, then this is what happens. The criminals take over. And does anybody really want the criminals to take over? We have to support the police. We have to get rid of the bad eggs in the police department, maybe change training. But the reality is, most of those police officers are doing a job to protect all of us. And we need to remember that. On that note, thanks, folks. Stay safe. Thanks for watching The Other Side of the News. Please feel free to leave a comment. Please subscribe and like. Until tomorrow, bye-bye.